All right, let's talk now about the implications of this politically with the political sciences professor at Unisa, Professor Dirk Kotzé. Good to have you, Prof, and thank you very much for your time this evening. So you've got two players politically here that firstly I wanted to start looking at, and then we're going to look at the others. But one is the minister herself, and two is the president. Firstly, the minister, is she politically vulnerable at this particular stage, considering how weak the ANC is and how it would have performed in the May 29 elections, the state of the ANC itself internally, where it is dealing with this question of renewal, and then there's this pressure that's coming from the opposition and civil society?
Yes, I think you are very much correct with this. Good evening. She is in a vulnerable position. I think the ANC in general, and specifically President Ramaphosa as the head of the executive, is now willing to take more action against members of the executive who have been identified as being involved in corrupt or fraudulent or other forms of activity, or being charged or being accused of that. We've seen it, for example, with Dirk Kotzé, who resigned from first as minister before the election, and then also as later on as member of parliament. And other persons followed to a large extent in the same direction. So there is certainly a difference in the atmosphere, in the way in which persons within the government or within senior persons in the ANC are now treated. They are less protected. We can also think about the former speaker and the former minister of defense, who are in a similar situation. So I think this is therefore it poses a threat for the minister in that respect. I think with respect to President Ramaphosa, the fact that there is now the ANC is not alone anymore, the government, but the government of national unity is there. There's the other parties and their ministers who are very active, and that they, as we have heard, the ANC is concerned that their own ministers are not performing at the same level as the ministers of the other parties. These all contribute to the fact that it will be exceptionally difficult for President Ramaphosa to simply treat it as something that a wait-and-see type of approach, to say, well, we wait until she's charged in court, and then the step-aside rule will apply, and so on. So I think in that respect, it is the Minister Simelane will have to, first of all, answer to President Ramaphosa's call that she must give him a briefing and a report of what is her side of the story.
I do not recall in the sixth administration at any point where President Cyril Ramaphosa would have had to reshuffle his cabinet, except for instances where there could have been a death, one of the ministers would have passed away, and because of the energy pressure, where he had to add a minister of energy. But are we likely going to see a different President Ramaphosa who now will be forced to midway reshuffle his cabinet?
Yes, well, if this materializes as we are now discussing it, then it will obviously force him to reshuffle the cabinet. It doesn't have to happen immediately. What we've seen in the past is that sometimes he appoints an acting minister to take responsibility for a certain portfolio until he reaches the point where there's maybe not only one person, but more than one portfolios that must be filled, or that he wants to change the composition of it also. So these are all options that he will have in order to deal with this situation. I think what will be almost, I would say, awkward is the fact that it happened so soon after the election. None of the ministers have really settled down yet in their new portfolios. So this will be a very much a new or unique situation. I can't recall that it has happened in the past during the time of, let's say, President Zuma, where there were many reshufflings of cabinet, that it happened so soon after an election.
Yeah. Is there backlash for the president now in his own party? I mean, we know that already there's dissatisfaction on the alliance part, at least, of this government of national unity, even though we also know that there are some, we don't know how many, within that NEC who would have liked the ANC not to be in a government of national unity. Now the president is going to have to act because he's in a government of national unity, and some within his party will say, well, you're acting to please the DA.
Well, that's I think the one sort of argument. The other argument would have been that even if he was not in a government of national unity or any form of coalition, this is possibly what he was supposed to do. Given the fact that, let's say, for example, the ANC survived still with a very slim majority, but have lost votes during this election. And that is the trend since 2009, that the ANC was constantly losing support. I think President Ramaphosa would have been under more or less the same pressure. I'm not sure that one can say it is purely because of the government of national unity that he's under the pressure in order to act against the minister, or to be at least go further than what is done in the past in order to demand accountability and an explanation from a minister. I think that the situation has changed for the ANC itself, as well as you refer to, for example, the pressure on the notion of renewal, internal renewal of the ANC. The fact that there's a sense that there must be a stronger sense of integrity. The role of the Integrity Commission has become more prominent, even before the election. So I think these are all factors that are now coming to fruition as a consequence of the period of state capture. These are matters that the ANC was supposed to do quite some long ago already, but they were, as a result of internal dynamics within the party, it has now become more possible for them to do it.
Outside of the party, is this a case of damned if you don't, damned if you do? Because if he doesn't act, those in the MK who have always said that in the ANC now, if you are for President Cyril Ramaphosa, nothing happens to you, will say, well, this is what we are talking about. But again, if he does act, the very same MK will say, well, you see, even Ramaphosa's administration is corrupt. What were you saying about Jacob Zuma and state capture? Same with the EFF. It would be a case of whether you act or you don't. Equally so, it's not going to look good for you.
Yes, I think that is the problem for the dilemma for President Zuma, for President Ramaphosa, as well as for the ANC in general, is that because this is a case now which about something that happened not now, in the last number of months or so, it happened quite some time back. So the legacy of the period of state capture is still something that the ANC will have to deal with, and possibly in future even deal more with than up to now. So it's historical situations that they have to deal with, but they have to do it now in real time. And I think that's the complication, because as you've indicated, the ANC is not as strong anymore as it has been before. It's in a sense more vulnerable, politically speaking, than before, irrespective of who are the parties in the coalition. It could have been MK and the EFF, and they would have still have had this predicament of how to deal with this situation. But I think one thing to add, which maybe one should also consider, is that the Minister Simelane is a former mayor of Polokwane. Is therefore one of the main centers in Limpopo. Limpopo has been the province in which the ANC received the best results in the past national and provincial elections, 73%. So, and therefore, as a former mayor, the minister is in a very significant and important position in the province. And at the same time, it's the province that's most associated with President Ramaphosa, where he comes from. So the fact that he's willing to take this step is an indication that he is now in a position where he has to act and can act against persons who are actually supposed to be very close to him.
How does this work then, especially for the implications for the other parties. One could say maybe it's the upside, where if he is able to act on his own, tomorrow if there is a DA MP or an IFP minister, shall I say, who is found in such incidents, he'll be able then to act with authority to say, well, I've acted on ANC ministers, surely I can act on DA ministers.
Yes, that's the upside of this. This is where it gives him a sense of authority, of I would say the moral authority also, not only constitutional authority, in order to act against any person now in his cabinet, and especially against ministers from any of the other parties. So that is something which I think for the longer term is something that will count very much in favor of President Ramaphosa. He has this president that he can always be able to rely on in order to strengthen his authority within the cabinet.
Political Sciences Professor at Unisa, Professor Dirk Kotzé, we appreciate your time. Thank you very much for coming on in your intervention tonight.